Imagine this scenario for a moment. You are a corporate human resources manager.
Okay.
It's a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. You've got your coffee, you're settling in at your desk, and you're casually scrolling through LinkedIn.
Right. Sounds like a typical day.
Exactly. And you are actively trying to fill this really crucial senior developer role for your company, and it has been a incredibly tough search. Then a direct message pops up.
Oh, nice. Finally a lead.
Right. It is from a job seeker, and honestly, their profile looks fantastic. I mean, they have the exact right programming skills, a perfect employment background, mutual connections, and they are, incredibly polite in their message.
The unicorn candidate.
The unicorn. So they explain they're looking for a new opportunity, and they send you a link to their portfolio along with a really polished resume. It looks completely 100% legitimate. So what do? Naturally, you click the link to view their work.
Well, yeah, because that is exactly what you're supposed to do in that job. I mean, it is your entire function to evaluate talent. If you don't click that link, you literally aren't doing your job.
Okay, but let's unpack this, because here is where the absolute nightmare begins.
Yeah.
The moment you click that link, you don't just see a resume. In a fraction of a second, entirely in the background, without a single warning window popping up on your screen, a highly sophisticated JavaScript-based Trojan called More Eggs executes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It secretly installs a backdoor directly into your corporate network. You didn't just review a candidate, you basically just handed the keys to your company's most sensitive data over to a notorious cyber espionage group known as FIN6.
It is a genuinely chilling scenario. And what is truly terrifying is that we aren't talking about some hypothetical made-up situation.
Right.
That is exactly how the FIN6 group, they're sometimes referred to by cybersecurity researchers as skeleton spider. That's how they operated.
Yeah.
They recognized a fundamental truth about modern networks,
Which is
that trying to smash through a heavily fortified corporate firewall using brute force is incredibly difficult. It's time-consuming, and honestly, it's noisy. It triggers alarms.
It gets you caught.
Exactly. So they decided to bypass the digital perimeter entirely. They simply asked human resources to, politely open the front door for them, leveraging the very tools and behaviors that business professionals use every single day.
So what does this all mean for us, for you listening? It means that in today's hyper-connected business world, your biggest threat isn't just a rival company launching a better product or some shift in macroeconomic trends. Your biggest threat might be a single disguised line of code.
Or a cleverly faked voice on the other end of a phone call.
Right. The modern business landscape is fundamentally a digital battlefield. The perimeter you have to defend is no longer a physical fence around a factory or even a centralized server room in a basement.
The perimeter is the inbox, the smartphone, and the web browser of every single employee in your organization.
Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. We are thrilled to have you with us today. This show is designed specifically for you, the students at the Dr. Sam Pack College of Business at Tarleton State University, as well as aspiring business leaders everywhere who know that, well, understanding the technology driving modern commerce is just non-negotiable.
It really is.
Today, we are taking a deep dive into the source material for Module 12, Securing Information. And for those of you following along in your coursework, the framework, the statistics, and all the concepts we are exploring today are drawn directly from your text.
That's right, Connect Master. Management Information Systems by Richard Tedmon and Casey Wilhelm. The 2026 McGraw-Hill edition.
It is arguably one of the most crucial modules in the entire curriculum because, as we will uncover today, securing information has transitioned from being an isolated, IT problem handled by people you never see to a fundamental top-level management imperative.
Yeah, it is entirely a board-level discussion now.
Before we jump into the deep end of the cybersecurity pool today, we need to build a quick bridge from where we just were. In Module 11, we explored the concept of competitive advantage.
Right, a massive topic.
We analyzed Michael Porter's 5 forces, looking at how existing competitors, the threat of new entries, supplier power, buyer power, and the threat of substitute products all pressure a business. We explored how companies decide between red ocean strategies,
where they fight tooth and nail for market share in existing bloodied markets.
Exactly, or blue ocean strategies, where they attempt to innovate and invent entirely new, uncontested market spaces.
And we didn't just look at the high-level strategy either. We looked at the operational execution required to actually achieve that advantage.
Right.
We discussed lean manufacturing principles and the 5 tenets of lean, which really focus on relentlessly identifying and eliminating waste from every single process. And we also examine Six Sigma production quality.
Which is pretty intense.
It is. It's a methodology reliant on intense statistical data analysis to reduce defects down to practically zero specifically, aiming for less than 3.4 errors per 1 million manufacturing steps.
Right. Module 11 was all about the grueling, years-long effort required to build a competitive advantage. I mean, it takes immense capital, visionary leadership, and just flawless execution to optimize those supply chains, build brand dominance, and perfect a product line.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
But we have to connect that immense effort to today's topic, because a business can spend a decade building a massive, insurmountable competitive advantage. They can achieve flawless Six Sigma quality, and all of that value, all of that hard work can be completely destroyed overnight by a single data breach.
Absolutely. Or, for that matter, a devastating natural disaster that wipes out their data centers.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, securing information is the ultimate defense of your competitive advantage. Think of it as like the armor protecting everything you built in Module 11.
That's a great way to frame it. I mean, you can have the leanest, most efficient manufacturing process in the world, but if a ransomware attack locks up your inventory management system, well, your factory grinds to a halt instantly.
Yeah, your supply chain just fails.
Exactly. You can have a brilliant, highly secretive blue ocean strategy. But if state-sponsored hackers infiltrate your network and steal your intellectual property and product designs before you even launch,
then your uncontested blue ocean turns red with competitors very, very quickly.
right, it completely reframes how we should view IT security. It isn't a cost center, it is survival.
Now, before we start dissecting the actual threats facing these organizations, a quick favor to ask you, the listener. Please take a second to like, subscribe, follow, and share this deep dive. It really is the best way to ensure you stay updated as we release new modules throughout the semester.
And please, join the conversation.
Yes. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts or questions. It is a fantastic way to study, engage actively with material, and network with your fellow future business leaders.
We actively review the comments, and honestly, the insights you all bring when applying these theoretical concepts to real-world business scenarios continually impress us.
All right, let's establish the ground rules of this digital battlefield. We hear words like cybercrime and cyber attack thrown around in the mainstream news almost interchangeably.
Constantly.
The media uses them as synonyms for just, anything bad happening on a computer. But in the specific discipline of management information systems, they mean very different things. Let's define the landscape. What exactly separates a cybercrime from a cyber attack?
It's a critical distinction for a business manager to understand because it fundamentally changes how you respond and who you involve. Let's start with cybercrime.
Okay.
The core definition of a cybercrime is an illegal act where a computer is either the primary object of the crime or it's the specific tool used to commit the offense. The motivation behind almost all cybercrime is financial gain.
Money. Always money.
Usually, yes. And we generally categorize cybercrime into two distinct operational types: single events and ongoing series of events.
Give me a concrete breakdown of a single event. Like, what is the mechanism there?
A single event cybercrime is a discrete action that happens to a victim once. The fallout or the financial recovery might take months, but the crime itself was a singular moment in time.
Right.
For example, you're browsing the internet, you click a malicious ad, and you unknowingly download a Trojan horse virus.
Okay.
Or you fall victim to identity theft because someone purchased your social security number on the dark web and opened a credit card in your name.
Right.
Or maybe someone commits e-commerce fraud by using your stolen debit card to buy electronics online. The action itself has a clear beginning and end.
Okay, that makes sense. A one-and-done strike. So how does an ongoing series of events differ mechanically from that?
Ongoing events are persistent, sustained campaigns. They require continuous effort by the perpetrator over a long period. This category includes severe crimes like cyberstalking, ongoing extortion, or blackmail campaigns where a criminal repeatedly demands payment to keep sensitive information private. Yeah, and it also includes terrorist activities that utilize networks for continuous communication, recruitment, or propaganda distribution. It is not a single transaction. It is a sustained, malicious relationship.
So that encompasses cybercrime. Money is usually the motive, and the computer is the tool. What elevates something to a cyber attack?
A cyber attack is much more targeted in its disruption. It is defined as a deliberate misuse of computers and networks via the internet, specifically utilizing malicious code to achieve a structural goal against the target's systems.
Okay.
The objective of a cyber attack usually falls into one of two strategic buckets. First, the attacker aims to completely disable a target computer, take a server offline, or prevent legitimate users from accessing a network.
Disruption.
Exactly. And second, the attacker is trying to gain unauthorized access to deeply hidden data stored on a device or acquire administrative privileges to take total operational control over that device or network.
So just to clarify the mechanism here for everyone listening, if a criminal uses my stolen password to drain my personal checking account, that is a cybercrime.
Correct.
But if a collective of hackers writes a custom virus designed to completely crash my company's main financial servers, or they sneak into the network architecture to siphon off our entire encrypted customer database, that is a cyber attack.
Precisely. Cybercrime is often about exploiting individuals or specific financial transactions. Cyber attacks are structural assaults on the integrity, availability, or confidentiality of an organization's entire information system.
And the landscape of who is facing these structural assaults might actually surprise you. When we think of cyber attacks, our minds naturally go to the massive headlines we see in the news, the huge global retail chains, the international hotel conglomerates, or the major credit bureaus getting hacked.
Of course, that's what makes the evening news.
Right. But the Tedmon and Wilhelm text points out a statistic that should be a massive wake-up call for every business student. 43% of all cyber attacks are aimed at small businesses.
That's a huge number.
I have to pause you there, though, because that feels so counterintuitive. I really want to push back on the logic of that statistic.
Okay, go for it.
Why would a sophisticated hacker target a small business? Let's invent a scenario. Say, a local commercial pool installation company with 20 employees in a suburb of Dallas. They install concrete pools for local businesses and HOAs. Why would a hacker waste their time, effort, and code on them instead of going after a massive multinational bank with billions of dollars in liquid assets? It just seems like a terrible return on investment for the hacker.
It is a great question, and honestly, it is a misconception that leaves thousands of small businesses vulnerable every single day. It comes down to understanding the harsh economic reality and the risk-reward ratio for cybercriminals.
Okay, walk me through it.
Let's analyze your local pool installation company. They might be small in terms of headcount, but think about the data they hold in their systems. They have hundreds of high-net-worth customer names, home addresses, phone numbers, and likely unencrypted credit card numbers or direct bank routing information used for billing and ongoing maintenance contracts.
That's true.
They also have extensive data on their suppliers and local government permitting offices.
So they are sitting on a treasure trove of personally identifiable information, or PII.
Exactly. And to a cyber criminal, that data is highly monetizable on the black market. But to address your pushback directly, yes, a major global bank has more of that data, millions of records instead of thousands.
Right.
However, that major bank also spends tens of millions of dollars every single year on enterprise-grade security architecture. I mean, they have floors of elite, highly paid cybersecurity personnel analyzing network traffic 24/7 that utilize cutting-edge AI threat detection. Attempting to hack them is incredibly difficult, highly risky, and requires elite custom-built tools.
And the local pool company?
The local pool company probably has a single IT person, or worse, the owner's nephew who's, good with computers managing the network.
Oh, man.
Yeah, they're likely using a basic, off-the-shelf consumer antivirus program, a standard router from their internet service provider, and employees who use the exact same password for their work email as they do for their personal social media. They simply lack the budget, the specialized personnel, and the awareness to defend themselves.
It's just the path of least resistance.
Completely. Hackers view small businesses as low-hanging fruit. From an economic standpoint, it is much easier, faster, and significantly safer for cybercriminal to deploy automated tools to successfully hack 100 poorly defended small businesses and extract their data than it is to spend 6 months trying to orchestrate a single breach against a major financial institution that might catch them and trigger a massive FBI investigation.
That makes total sense when you put it like that. They're playing a volume game against soft targets.
Exactly.
But we have to scale this up. As we move up from financially motivated hackers going after local businesses, we hit a level of threat that is much more intimidating and, frankly, complex. State-sponsored cyber warfare.
Yeah, this is where it gets really intense.
This always sounds like something pulled directly from a geopolitical spy thriller to me. What is the actual definition of this in the context of MIS?
State-sponsored cyber warfare refers to cyber attacks that originate from, are orchestrated by, or are directly funded and executed by foreign governments.
Okay.
But it also includes attacks carried out by independent groups or proxy syndicates who have been secretly contracted and paid by a foreign government to act on their behalf.
Providing the government with plausible deniability.
Exactly.
We study traditional military strategy and espionage, but why do nations increasingly turn to cyber warfare? Like, why use code instead of covert operatives or traditional military posturing?
For several really key strategic reasons. First, it is highly effective and incredibly disruptive. You can cripple a nation's power grid or banking sector from a keyboard halfway across the world.
Right.
Second, it is relatively inexpensive. I mean, developing a sophisticated piece of malware costs a fraction of what it costs to design, build, and maintain a single fighter jet or an aircraft carrier.
That's a really good point.
And third, and perhaps most importantly in geopolitics, it is notoriously difficult to trace with 100% definitive attribution. If a physical missile hits a facility, you can track its trajectory. If a piece of malware destroys a server, the attackers can route their attack through dozens of proxy servers across multiple countries, leaving this tangled web that makes it very hard to definitively prove which government actually gave the order.
It is the ultimate weapon of asymmetric warfare.
Exactly. Nations utilize these tactics for various strategic goals: to steal advanced intellectual property so they can avoid R&D costs, to send geopolitical warnings, to intentionally degrade a rival nation's critical infrastructure or resources, or just to quietly map networks and gather intelligence for a future competitive advantage.
And the Tedmon and Wilhelm text provides a very clear, documented example of this, right?
Yes, it does. From March to June of 2025, leading global cybersecurity firms uncovered a massive, highly coordinated series of cyber espionage attacks, specifically targeting Taiwan's semiconductor industry.
Let's contextualize that for the business students listening. Semiconductors are the microscopic chips that run literally everything in our modern economy.
Everything.
They are in our smartphones, our laptops, our cars, our medical devices, and advanced military hardware. And Taiwan manufactures the vast majority of the world's most advanced chips. They are the absolute center of gravity for global technology.
Which is exactly why they were targeted. These extensive attacks were attributed by cybersecurity analysts to Chinese state-sponsored actors. The prevailing analysis is that this campaign was part of a relentless, ongoing effort to gather deep intelligence, steal proprietary chip designs, and gain a massive competitive advantage in the global semiconductor market.
Wow.
Yeah. By successfully exfiltrating years of painstaking research and development data, a competing nation can essentially leapfrog a decade of costly, trial-and-error development and immediately begin manufacturing advanced technology.
It is corporate espionage executed at the nation-state level with pretty much limitless resources.
Precisely.
I think it is important to pause here and clarify something for our listeners. As we discuss these global events, whether it involves the geopolitics of China and Taiwan or the next historical example we will discuss involving the Middle East, our objective here on the deep dive isn't to debate foreign policy or take political sides.
Absolutely not.
We are purely looking at the factual reality of the cyber threat landscape, the mechanisms of the attacks, and the business implications as documented in the source material.
That is a crucial distinction. We are analyzing the mechanics of the digital battlefield, not the politics of it. And speaking to the mechanics, there is another historical example detailed in the text that fundamentally changed how security professionals view the potential of a cyber attack.
Right.
It proved that code doesn't just steal data, it can actually cross over into the physical world. I am talking about Stuxnet.
Yes, the Stuxnet worm, discovered around 2010. This is widely considered a watershed moment, a massive paradigm shift in cybersecurity history. Intelligence agencies from the United States and Israel reportedly engineered and launched this incredibly complex, multi-layered malware against the Natanz nuclear facility in Iran.
And here's where the mechanism of the attack gets truly fascinating. Because most malware up to that point was designed to steal credit cards, delete files, or maybe crash email servers. Stuxnet was entirely different. It was the world's first known digital weapon designed specifically to cause real-world, physical, kinetic destruction.
Wait, how does code on a computer screen cause a massive piece of industrial machinery to physically destroy itself? Walk us through that mechanism.
It requires an unbelievable level of engineering. Stuxnet didn't target standard Windows operating systems to, steal Word documents.
Yeah.
It was specifically designed to infiltrate and subvert supervisory control and data acquisition, or SCADA, systems. Specifically, it targeted the programmable logic controllers, the PLCs, manufactured by Siemens. These PLCs are the tiny industrial computers that actually control the physical motors and valves of massive machinery.
And at the Nathan's facility, those PLCs were controlling gas centrifuges used for enriching uranium.
Correct. Uranium enrichment requires these really delicate centrifuges to spin at incredibly precise high frequencies. Stuxnet was introduced into the facility, likely via a compromised USB drive, since the facility's networks were air-gapped, meaning they were totally disconnected from the outside internet.
Right.
Once inside, the malware hunted for those specific Siemens PLCs. When it found them, it secretly altered the code controlling the frequency converters.
So it actually changed how fast the motors were spinning.
It did. It intermittently commanded the centrifuges to spin at dangerously high speeds and then suddenly drop to abnormally low speed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this created intense physical vibrations and immense mechanical stress, causing the delicate aluminum tubes to literally tear themselves apart and shatter. But the most insidious part of Stuxnet was its stealth mechanism.
Because, I mean, if a machine starts vibrating violently, human operators in the control room are going to hit the emergency stop button, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Stuxnet performed what is essentially a man-in-the-middle attack on the physical sensors themselves. While it was physically ripping the centrifuges apart, it simultaneously intercepted the sensor data being sent back to the human operators' monitoring screens in the control room.
Are you serious?
Yes. It fed them a pre-recorded loop of normal, safe operating data. So the operators looked at their screens, saw green lights and normal spin rates, and had absolutely no idea the physical machines in the next room were destroying themselves until it was far too late.
That is an astonishing level of sophistication.
It was entirely unprecedented. It successfully damaged or destroyed over 1,000 centrifuges and caused massive, years-long delays to the Iranian nuclear program. It fundamentally proved that a highly targeted digital weapon could cause catastrophic kinetic damage to physical infrastructure. It blurred the line between a cyber attack and a physical military strike.
Which actually provides a really necessary pivot for us. Because when we talk about securing information and maintaining business continuity, we can become entirely focused on, hackers in dark hoodies, complex malware, and state-sponsored espionage. We focus on the digital threats.
Right.
But sometimes the entity that destroys your data center doesn't have a heartbeat, a political motive, or a keyboard. Sometimes the ultimate threat is Mother Nature.
This is a massive blind spot for so many organizations. The physical threat to information systems is immense. The United States alone has suffered over $1.7 trillion with a T in economic costs from natural disasters since 1980.
It's staggering.
We are talking about the devastating impacts of wildfires in California, massive flooding in the Midwest, hurricanes battering the Gulf Coast, tornadoes tearing through the South, and earthquakes threatening the West Coast.
Right.
From a purely operational business continuity standpoint, a Category 4 hurricane flooding your primary ground floor server room with 6 feet of salt water is just as devastating, if not more so, than a ransomware gang wiping your hard drives. The result is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Total loss of data and operational capability.
So how does a modern business manager actually prepare for a threat they have absolutely zero control over? You can't, patch a firewall against a tornado.
Exactly.
The text outlines a critical 4-step mitigation plan. Let's walk through the mechanics of this, because this is where IT strategy meets operational reality. Step 1 is having a formalized business continuity plan.
Right. And formalized is the key word there. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, strongly recommends that organizations develop a robust, heavily documented business continuity plan. This isn't just a vague idea discussed in a meeting of what people should do if the building catches fire.
It's not a suggestion box.
No, it is an exhaustive, step-by-step manual of exact actions, protocols, and responsibilities required post-disaster to keep the core functions of the business running.
What does that actually look like in practice, though?
It defines chains of command. If the CEO is unreachable, who specifically has authority? It outlines communication protocols. How do we notify all 500 employees that the corporate headquarters is destroyed?
Right. How do you even reach them?
It specifies alternative work locations. If the building is gone, do people work from home, or do we have a secondary lease on a warehouse space? It dictates how to access emergency capital and payroll systems to ensure employees are still paid during the crisis. It really is the blueprint for survival.
Okay, step 2 in the mitigation plan is off-site cloud storage. This feels pretty ubiquitous now with services like AWS or Microsoft Azure, but why is it a mandatory step for disaster prep?
Because keeping all your data in the exact same physical building as your employees and your operations is a massive single point of failure. storing your critical data in the cloud, which essentially means on servers owned by a third party, located in large, heavily fortified data centers outside your geographic region, exponentially increases the likelihood that your data survives, even if your local physical hardware is reduced to ash.
Okay, step 3 is fascinating, and I feel like it is the step where most businesses completely fail. Maintenance of a data inventory. Let's dig into the mechanics of this. It essentially means knowing exactly where all your data lives, but why is that so difficult for a modern company?
Because data in a modern business is incredibly decentralized and fluid. Think about how a typical mid-sized company operates today. You have legacy data sitting on physical servers in an IT closet. You have massive amounts of data in cloud storage. You have terabytes of data sitting on individual employee laptops that haven't been backed up in months.
A total mess.
But then you have what IT professionals call shadow IT.
What is shadow IT?
It is the software and applications that employees use without the explicit approval or knowledge of the IT department.
Oh, I've seen this.
Right. The marketing team decides they need a new project management tool, so they just buy a subscription to Monday.com or Trello using a corporate credit card and start uploading proprietary marketing strategies and customer lists. The HR team starts using a new SaaS platform for employee evaluations.
So the IT department doesn't even know that data exists on those third-party servers.
Exactly. And if a disaster hits, you cannot recover, secure, or restore data if you don't even know it existed or where it was being stored in the first place. A data inventory is essentially a rigorous, constantly updated map of every single digital asset the company owns across all platforms, devices, and shadow applications. It is tedious, exhausting work, but without that map, recovery is totally impossible.
That brings us to step 4, geographic data redundancy. This is the ultimate failsafe.
It really is. Geographic data redundancy means you are actively replicating your entire operational data set and storing it in a completely separate physical location far away from the primary site.
Let's create a concrete minute-by-minute scenario to illustrate how this works mechanically, using the example from the text. Let's say your company is a major e-commerce retailer. Your primary business operations, your headquarters, and your main active data servers are all located in Seattle, Washington.
Okay, and Seattle is situated on a major fault line. It is a known high-risk earthquake zone.
Right, so it's 2:08 p.m. on a Tuesday. A massive 8.0 magnitude earthquake strikes Seattle. The local power grid instantly collapses. The physical building housing your primary servers sustains structural damage, and the backup generators fail. Within seconds, your entire Seattle operation is dark. Your primary servers are completely offline.
And if you didn't have geographic redundancy, your e-commerce website just went down globally. You are bleeding hundreds, thousands of dollars a minute in lost sales, and customer trust is evaporating.
But because you followed the mitigation plan, you built geographic redundancy. You have an exact, real-time mirrored copy of your data on a backup server cluster located thousands of miles away, completely unaffected by the earthquake, let's say, in St. Louis, Missouri. How does the failover actually happen?
It relies on automated network routing protocols. Usually, your system uses DNS domain name system routing. When a customer in New York types in your website, the internet routing systems normally point them to the IP address of the Seattle servers. The moment the Seattle servers go offline and stop responding to automated health checks, the routing system instantly detects the failure. Within seconds, the DNS records automatically update, redirecting all incoming global traffic to the IP address of the backup servers in St. Louis.
So the earthquake hits Seattle, the local systems die, but the digital infrastructure seamlessly fails over to St. Louis. From a functional perspective, what does the customer see?
If it's engineered correctly, the customer logging into your website in New York might not even notice a hiccup. Maybe a page takes an extra half second to load. The business keeps running, capturing sales and processing orders, even while the physical headquarters is in ruins. It is the ultimate removal of a single point of failure.
Okay, let's pivot back from the forces of nature to the human actors driving the digital threat. We are looking at white hats versus black hats. It sounds like the plot of an old Western movie, but it represents the two sides of the cybersecurity industry. Let's start with the defenders. What defines a white hat hacker?
A white hat hacker is an elite, ethical, non-malicious computer security expert. They possess the exact same deep technical knowledge of networks, coding, and vulnerabilities as a cybercriminal, but their motivation is defense.
Okay.
Organizations actively hire them, often as highly paid consultants, to intentionally attack and test their security measures. The logic is simple. You want to find the holes in your own armor before a malicious actor finds them for you.
Okay, let's build an analogy for this. It is like you own a massive, highly secure diamond warehouse. You've installed cameras, motion sensors, and reinforced doors. A white hat hacker is like paying a team of the world's most sophisticated professional burglars to try and break into that warehouse.
Yes.
Not because you want them to steal the diamonds, but because you want them to hand you a detailed report on exactly how they managed to bypass your motion sensors, which specific lock they picked on the roof hatch, and which security guard they tricked into giving up a key code. They show you your weaknesses so you can fix them before a real criminal cartel shows up.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. And they do this through several formalized processes. The most prominent is penetration testing, commonly referred to in the industry as pen testing.
Right.
During a pen test, the white hats are authorized to actively launch simulated cyber attacks against private corporate networks, web applications, or cloud infrastructure. They actively try to exploit vulnerabilities to see exactly how far they can get into the system. They also conduct broader vulnerability testing, scanning for known outdated software or misconfigurations.
If they are simulating attacks, do they use specialized defensive software or do they use the same weapons as the bad guys?
That is precisely what makes their work effective. They utilize the exact same techniques, exploits, and toolkits that illegitimate hackers use on the dark web. They emulate the adversary perfectly. However, the field is evolving rapidly. Modern white hat operations now heavily utilize new technologies like automated breach and attack simulation, or BAS.
How does BAS change the game?
Well, instead of a human manually typing code to try one attack vector at a time, BAS uses software to automate the hacking attempts. It can continuously run thousands of different attack vectors, simulating various types of malware or phishing campaigns against a network 247, just to see what gets through the defenses. It provides constant, real-time threat analysis, rather than just a one-time snapshot.
That sounds incredibly valuable, but I have to assume hiring elite ethical hackers or deploying continuous BA software isn't cheap?
It is extremely expensive. A comprehensive pen test for a mid-sized company can cost tens of thousands of dollars. Which, connecting back to our earlier discussion, is exactly why those small businesses, the local pool company, can't afford these services and remain vulnerable.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, the cybersecurity environment is incredibly dynamic. It changes daily. A pen test might show your network is completely secure on a Friday afternoon, but if hackers discover a brand new vulnerability in a common piece of software on Saturday morning, that expensive report is instantly outdated, and you are vulnerable all over again.
It is a constant game of cat and mouse. By the way, for the college students listening, ethical hacking is an incredibly lucrative and rapidly expanding career field. There are dedicated 2-year and 4-year college cybersecurity programs focused entirely on training white hat professionals.
Oh, absolutely. It is a fantastic career path with virtually zero unemployment right now.
Right.
But to understand the defenders, we have to look at the adversaries, the black hats. These are the malicious actors, the cyber criminals looking to cause damage, extort money, or steal data for profit or espionage.
When I picture a black hat hacker, I picture, a coding savant in a dark room, typing 1,000,000 miles an hour, writing custom viruses from scratch. But the text suggests that is largely a Hollywood myth, right?
It is. While there are elite, highly skilled black hats who write custom zero-day exploits, the vast majority of malicious actors today are essentially novices. They're often referred to derisively within the hacker community as script kiddies.
I've heard that term. Why script kiddies? Because they just rely on pre-written scripts.
Exactly. They lack the fundamental programming skills, the understanding of network architecture, or honestly the patience to write complex malware themselves. Instead, they go onto the internet and simply download or purchase pre-made hashing tools, exploit kits, and automated scripts created by the elite hackers. They are just pointing and clicking.
And a massive amount of this commerce, the buying and selling of these tools, happens on the dark web. We hear dark web thrown around in the news constantly, usually accompanied by ominous music. What is it mechanically? How is it different from the regular internet?
It is important to define this technically. The internet we use every day, Google, Wikipedia, Amazon, is the surface web. It is indexed by search engines. Below that is the deep web, which is just unindexed content like your private banking portal, corporate intranets, or academic databases. You need a password, but you use a normal browser.
Okay.
The dark web is a very small, specific segment of the deep web that has been intentionally hidden. You cannot access it using standard browsers like Chrome or Safari, and standard search engines cannot index its pages.
So how do you actually get there?
You need specialized software, the most prominent being the Tor browser. Tor stands for the Onion Router.
Why an onion?
Because of how it handles data routing. When you use Tor to access a site on the dark web, your connection isn't direct. Your data traffic is encrypted in multiple layers, like the layers of an onion, and bounced through a random sequence of volunteer proxy servers distributed all over the globe before it reaches its destination.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and each server only peels back one layer of encryption to see the next destination, but never the full path. This makes tracing the user's IP address or physical location nearly impossible.
It provides total anonymity.
Yes, and within that anonymous space, black hat hackers have built a massive, thriving illicit economy. They buy and sell massive databases of stolen credit cards and social security numbers. But more dangerously, they operate on a malware-as-a-service model.
Malware-as-a-Service, like SaaS, but for hackers.
Yeah. Exactly. Elite hackers sell complete, user-friendly malware kits, essentially hacking for dummies, software packages that allow script kiddies to launch highly sophisticated ransomware or phishing campaigns with no technical skills required. They even offer customer support and split the profits.
It's the total commoditization and corporatization of cybercrime. You don't need to know how to forge the weapon, you just need enough cryptocurrency to buy it off the shelf. And speaking of the corporatization of hacking, the text brings up a really eye-opening example from 2025 that blew my mind.
Yes, the massive U.S. indictment of the Chinese technology contractor known as iSoon. This case was a watershed moment because it provided a rare documented look inside state-linked hack-for-hire operations.
Break down the iSoon model. How did it operate?
iSoon functioned essentially like a legitimate modern tech startup, complete with HR departments, performance reviews, and sales quotas. But their product was cyber espionage. The U.S. indictment revealed that they operated as independent contractors, essentially mercenaries, who were utilized by various branches of the Chinese government and domestic security services to execute massive cyber campaigns.
So the government didn't have to hire the hackers directly as military personnel. They just outsourced the cyber attacks to a private company.
Exactly. It completely blurs the line between a private, profit-driven cybercriminal enterprise and state-sponsored espionage. iSoon employees were tasked with hacking into foreign governments, telecommunications firms, and overseas dissidents, stealing massive amounts of data, and then presenting that data to government handlers to fulfill contracts. It showed that the threat isn't always a military unit. Sometimes it's a private company operating a 9-to-5 hack-for-hire business.
Okay, so we have established who is attacking us, from the script kiddies renting tools to the state-sponsored mercenary corporations. Now, we need to examine what exactly they are loading into the chamber. What are the weapons? Let's dive into the malware arsenal. Malware is a broad catch-all term for malicious software, but there are distinct categories with very different mechanics. Let's start with the two most commonly confused terms. Viruses versus Trojans. I hear people use these interchangeably all the time, but functionally they operate in completely different ways, right?
They do, and understanding the difference dictates exactly how you defend against them. Let's start with a computer virus. A computer virus is software created with malicious code designed to infect a computer and cause harm. But the defining characteristic of a virus is its behavior, which heavily mirrors a biological virus in the real world.
Meaning its primary goal is to spread and infect other hosts.
Precisely. It is designed to self-replicate. But here's the critical mechanical dependency. A computer virus almost always requires some sort of human action to trigger its initial execution. It doesn't just spontaneously generate.
Right.
It usually arrives attached to an email, embedded in a downloaded file, or hidden on a USB drive. The virus sits entirely dormant until the human user actually double-clicks and runs or opens that infected file.
So if I receive an email with a highly destructive virus attached to it, but I never open the attachment, I just highlight the email and hit delete. My computer is completely safe. The virus needed me to pull the trigger to execute its code.
Exactly. But once that human takes the action and executes the file, the virus activates. It immediately begins copying its malicious code and inserting it into other clean files, programs, and system locations on the computer. Then it attempts to spread to other computers, perhaps by exploiting a local network connection in an office, or by silently hijacking the user's email client and sending copies of itself to everyone in their contact list.
And then what?
Finally, after it is replicated, the payload, the actual destructive activity like rapidly deleting files, corrupting the operating system registry, or displaying a message, is executed.
Okay, that is a virus. It needs a human to start, and then it aggressively replicates. How does that compare to a Trojan or a Trojan horse?
The name itself tells you exactly how the software works. In Greek mythology, the Greek army couldn't breach the walls of Troy, so they built a giant wooden horse, hid soldiers inside, and gifted it to the Trojans. The Trojans willingly pulled it inside their own gates.
Right. Classic story.
A digital Trojan operates on the exact same premise. It is a malicious program that disguises itself to appear completely legitimate, useful, or even entertaining.
So it could look like a helpful PDF converter app, a critical software update for your browser, or, going back to our intro, a highly qualified job seeker's portfolio.
Yes, you, the user, willingly download and install it because you think you are getting something beneficial. You invite it past your defenses. But once it's on your system and you run it, while it might actually perform the function it promised to maintain the illusion, it secretly executes unwanted, malicious activity in the background.
And what is the primary functional difference from a virus?
A Trojan does not replicate itself. It doesn't aggressively try to infect other files or spread to other computers on the network. Its primary goal is stealth and persistence. It wants to sit quietly on your machine undetected.
What's it doing while it sits there?
Often, its main function is to create a hidden backdoor into your operating system. This backdoor bypasses normal authentication and allows a remote hacker to secretly connect to your machine, spy on your activities, steal sensitive data, or quietly download and install further specialized malware like Keyloggers or Ransomware directly onto your system.
The text gives us two really concrete, terrifying examples of Trojans in action. Let's break down the mechanics of the Tiny Banker Trojan, often referred to as TBT.
The Tiny Banker Trojan is widely considered one of the most effective and damaging financial malware attacks of the last decade. It successfully infected the systems of over 24 major U.S. banking institutions. The mechanism of TBT is incredibly insidious. Once a user's computer is infected with TBT, usually via a malicious email attachment or a drive-by download from a compromised website, the Trojan embeds itself and specifically monitors the user's web browser activity. It sits quietly, doing nothing, until the user navigates to their specific bank's official website.
Wait, how does it know you are at the bank?
It monitors the URLs and the code of the pages you visit. When it recognizes the secure login page of a targeted bank, the Trojan springs into action. Using a technique called DOM manipulation, it injects its own malicious code directly into the web page displayed on your browser.
And what does that actually look like to the user?
As you attempt to log in, it generates a fraudulent pop-up window or an overlay on your screen. And this pop-up is flawless. It pulls the original CSS code, the exact high-resolution logos, and the precise branding colors of your actual bank. It usually presents a message saying something like, "For enhanced security, please re-enter your login credentials," or it might ask for your debit card PIN or answers to security questions.
That's evil.
Because it looks entirely legitimate, and you are actively looking at the URL of your real bank in the address bar, your guard is totally down. You type the information in. The Trojan instantly captures that data, encrypts it, and sends it straight to the cybercriminal's command and control server.
Wow. You are on the right website, but the Trojan hijacked the display. And the second example targets the device we use more than our computers, our smartphones, Eventbot.
Eventbot is a highly sophisticated mobile Trojan, specifically targeting the Android operating system. It relies heavily on social engineering to get installed. It disguises itself as a legitimate application, often masquerading as Microsoft Word, Adobe Flash Player, or just a generic utility app. Crucially, it is usually distributed via unofficial third-party app stores or malicious links, rather than the highly monitored official Google Play Store.
And once a user is tricked into installing it on their phone,
it operates as a voracious info stealer. Once installed, it immediately requests broad permissions from the user, specifically asking to utilize the built-in accessibility features of the Android operating system.
Okay, the accessibility features.
Right. These features are designed to help users with disabilities by allowing apps to read the screen aloud or automate tabs. Eventbot abuses these permissions to secretly read user data and intercept interactions with over 200 different global financial and banking applications installed on the phone.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. Even if Eventbot steals my banking password from my phone screen, almost all banks use two-factor authentication, or 2FA now. That is the gold standard for security. You type in your password, and then the bank texts you a unique 6-digit code to prove it's really you holding the phone. The hacker might have my password, but they don't have my phone to get the code.
That is exactly why Eventbot is so dangerous. It is engineered specifically to defeat SMS-based two-factor authentication. Remember those accessibility permissions it tricked the user into granting?
Yeah.
Eventbot uses them to silently monitor the device's incoming SMS text messages.
Oh no. So walk me through the heist.
The hacker, sitting in another country, goes to your bank's website and tries to log in using the password Eventbot previously stole from you. The bank's security system triggers and sends the 6-digit 2FA text message to your smartphone. Eventbot detects the incoming text from the bank. It intercepts the message, reads the 6-digit code, immediately forwards that code to the hacker's server, and then deletes the text message from your phone or hides the notification.
You never even hear your phone ping?
Never. The hacker types the intercepted 6-digit code into the bank's website, bypasses the 2FA security, and completely drains your checking account.
That is deeply unsettling. The security measure you rely on is being used against you silently. All right, let's move to arguably the most famous, devastating, and disruptive type of malware operating right now, ransomware.
Ransomware is malware that essentially takes your entire computer system or your company's entire network hostage. Once it infiltrates a system, often via a Trojan or a phishing email, it rapidly executes a military-grade encryption algorithm on all of the victim's data files, databases, and operating system components.
It scrambles everything.
Yes, it scrambles the data mathematically, making it completely inaccessible and unreadable. The victim is then locked out and presented with a stark screen demanding a ransom payment.
And they always demand payment in cryptocurrency, right? Why is that?
Yes, usually Bitcoin or Monero. They use cryptocurrency because it operates on a decentralized blockchain. While the ledger of transactions is public, the wallets are anonymous, making it incredibly difficult for international law enforcement to trace the funds back to a specific individual or bank account, unlike a traditional wire transfer. They demand this payment in exchange for the cryptographic decryption key required to unlock and unscramble the files.
Okay, but let's look at how the game has changed. For years, the defense against ransomware was simple in theory. Just have good backups. If a hacker locks your system, you just refuse to pay, wipe your hard drives, and restore everything from your backup tapes. But the text talks about a terrifying evolution in hacker strategy, double or triple extortion attacks. How does that change the math for a business?
It changes it completely. The hackers got greedy, and they realized that organizations with robust backup strategies were simply restoring their systems and refusing to pay the ransom. Their revenue stream was drying up. So they evolved their tactics to double extortion.
How does that work?
In a double extortion attack, the malware still encrypts your data. But before it triggers the encryption lock, the ransomware spends days or weeks quietly copying and exfiltrating gigabytes of your most highly sensitive, confidential data, uploading it to servers controlled by the cybercriminals on the dark web.
So now they have a copy of everything.
Exactly. So the company's IT director says, we don't care that you locked our servers, we have offline backups, we can just restore everything by Monday. But the hacker counters with a new devastating threat. The hacker says, okay, go ahead and restore your systems, but I have a copy of your entire customer database, all their unencrypted credit card numbers, all of your employees' social security numbers, and all the CEO's private emails. If you do not pay the ransom in 48 hours, I am going to publicly leak all of this data onto the open internet.
So the extortion isn't just about regaining access to your operational data anymore. It is about preventing a massive, brand-destroying public data breach that will result in massive regulatory fines, lawsuits, and the total loss of customer trust. They are holding your reputation hostage, not just your files.
Precisely. And if that isn't enough pressure, we are now seeing triple extortion.
What could possibly be worse than leaking the data?
Triple extortion adds a layer of aggressive operational disruption. If the victim still refuses to pay the ransom, the hackers might simultaneously launch a massive distributed denial of service or DDoS attack against the victim's public-facing website or network infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
So the company's desperately trying to restore their internal systems from backups while agonizing over the threat of a massive data leak, and simultaneously their e-commerce website is completely knocked offline by a flood of malicious traffic, stopping all revenue generation. It is a coordinated strategy designed to create overwhelming, unbearable chaos so the company simply capitulates and pays.
So how does a business defend against a threat that multi-layered?
Prevention requires a deeply integrated, multi-layered defensive posture. As you mentioned, regular data backups are crucial, but they must be air-gapped or stored completely offline so the ransomware cannot physically reach the backups across the network to encrypt them too. It requires strict implementation of multi-factor authentication across all systems to stop unauthorized access, rigorous patch management to close known software vulnerabilities, advanced email filtering to catch the phishing emails that deliver the payload, and crucially, continuous training for employees to recognize those social engineering attempts. Let's move to the next category in the arsenal, which focuses on surveillance. Spyware. specifically keyloggers and packet sniffers. Let's start with keyloggers. A keystroke logger, or keylogger, does exactly what its name implies. It is a form of spyware designed to secretly record every single keystroke typed on a target keyboard. The goal is simple and highly effective. Capture usernames, complex passwords, banking PNs, and confidential corporate communications exactly as the user types them, before the data is even encrypted by the browser or application.
Now, these can be software, but they can also be physical devices, right?
Yes. They are most commonly software applications, often installed silently via a Trojan backdoor. But they can also be physical hardware devices. A malicious actor with physical access to an office might secretly plug a small USB adapter into the back of a desktop computer between the keyboard cable and the tower. It physically intercepts the electrical signals of the keystroke.
That's sneaky.
Very. Furthermore, we are increasingly seeing cloud-based keyloggers that integrate into compromised web browsers, recording every form field you fill out online and sending the data silently to the attacker.
Okay, that covers what you type.
Yeah.
What about the data moving across the network? That is where packet sniffers come in. What is the mechanism here?
To understand packet sniffers, you have to understand how the internet routes information. When you do anything online, view a web page, send an email, upload a file, your data isn't sent as one giant continuous stream. The TCP/IP protocols break your data down into small, manageable pieces called data packets. These packets act like digital envelopes. They contain a piece of the data, plus a header that lists the source IP address and the destination IP address. These packets are sent across the network, routed through various switches, and reassembled in the correct order at the destination.
Like breaking a long letter into 100 smaller postcards, mailing them all, and having the recipient tape them back together.
Exactly. Normally, a computer's network interface card ignores any data packets that are not explicitly addressed to its specific IP address. It only reads its own mail. A packet sniffer, or packet analyzer, is software that commands the network card to enter promiscuous mode. In this mode, the network card intercepts, captures, and records every single data packet moving across the local network segment, regardless of its destination.
Now, the text does point out there are legitimate administrative uses for sniffers.
Yes, network administrators use them constantly to troubleshoot network bottlenecks, analyze traffic flow, or identify malfunctioning hardware. But in the hands of a cybercriminal, an unauthorized packet sniffer is a devastating tool for data theft.
If we connect this back to business relevance, this highlights exactly why data encryption is so critical. Because if an attacker installs a packet sniffer on a corporate network where data is flowing unencrypted in plain text, what happens?
They can just passively sit there, undetected, and capture every single email, every unencrypted password, and every customer credit card transaction mid-flight as it moves across the network. If the data is encrypted, the sniffer still captures the packet, but the contents just look like mathematical gibberish. This is why securing data in transit is just as important as securing data at rest.
Okay, let's explore the deepest, most insidious threat in the malware arsenal, rootkits. The name alone sounds like something you don't want on your machine. What makes a rootkit different from a standard virus?
A rootkit is a highly sophisticated, secretive type of malicious program designed to operate at the absolute lowest, most foundational levels of a device's operating system. Its primary function is to provide unauthorized, continuous, root-level, or administrative access to a computer while actively hiding its existence and the existence of other malware from the user and the system's security software.
Let's break down the mechanics of how it hides, because I think a lot of people assume their standard antivirus will catch everything. Why doesn't standard antivirus catch a rootkit?
It has to do with the architecture of operating systems, often conceptualized as rings of privilege. Standard applications like your web browser or your word processor operate in the outer rings, usually ring 3. They have limited privileges. Even your standard antivirus software often operates relatively high up in the architecture.
Okay.
A rootkit, however, is designed to infect the system at the kernel level, ring 0. This is the absolute core of the operating system that controls the hardware and memory.
So the rootkit is operating below the antivirus software.
Exactly. Because the rootkit controls the kernel, it essentially controls reality for the rest of the computer. If the antivirus software asks the operating system, "Are there any malicious files in this folder?" the rootkit intercepts the request, lies, and tells the antivirus, "No, everything looks perfectly normal here."
Wow.
It subverts the very tools designed to detect it. By holding root access, cybercriminals have total remote control over the device. They can bypass authentication, intercept keystrokes, alter system logs to erase their tracks, and disable security protocols.
So if it's invisible to the antivirus, how do you get rid of it?
It is incredibly difficult. While highly advanced security tools can sometimes detect rootkits during the initial installation phase, once a sophisticated rootkit has successfully burrowed into the kernel, it is incredibly resilient. Sometimes, the only way to truly definitively eradicate a rootkit is to completely wipe the computer's hard drive, reformat it, and reinstall the entire operating system from trusted, pristine media.
And how do these usually get onto a machine? The text mentions drive-by downloads.
Yes. A drive-by download is particularly dangerous because it requires zero interaction from the user beyond simply browsing the web. You don't have to click a malicious link or download a file. Simply visiting a compromised, illegitimate website, or even a legitimate website that has been injected with malicious code, automatically triggers the malware download in the background by exploiting vulnerabilities in your web browser or outdated plugins.
Okay, the final weapons in the arsenal are DOS and DDoS attacks. We mentioned these earlier as the final threat in a triple extortion ransomware scenario. What is the fundamental mechanism here?
Let's start with GOS, which stands for Denial of Service. The goal of a DOS attack is completely different from a Trojan or spyware. The attacker is not trying to steal data, exfiltrate passwords, or install a backdoor. The sole objective is disruption. They want to interrupt or completely stop network traffic to a specific target, usually a company's web server or a critical application.
How do they accomplish that without hacking in?
By overwhelming the system. Every web server has a finite capacity for how many requests it can handle simultaneously. In a DOS attack, the attacker uses a single device to bombard the target server with a massive flood of fake requests, malformed data packets, or connection protocols. The target server spends all of its processing power and memory trying to acknowledge and answer these fake requests. Eventually, the server becomes so overwhelmed that it crashes, or its bandwidth is completely saturated, denying service to legitimate customers trying to access the site.
But a standard DOS attack is launched from one single computer, which means a modern, robust corporate firewall can usually identify that single malicious IP address and just block it, mitigating the attack. Which brings us to the much bigger threat: DDoS, distributed denial of service.
Exactly. A DDoS attack uses the exact same concept of overwhelming the target, but on a massive distributed scale. Instead of one computer sending requests, a DDoS attack utilizes thousands or even millions of compromised devices geographically distributed around the world to simultaneously flood the target.
Where does a hacker get millions of devices to coordinate an attack?
They build an army, known as a botnet. Hackers spend months using automated malware like worms or Trojans to quietly infect poorly secured computers, laptops, and tablets. But increasingly, they target Internet of Things or IoT devices. We are talking about internet-connected smart thermostats, smart refrigerators, and especially cheap home security cameras that still have the default factory passwords installed.
So my smart fridge could be participating in a cyber attack without me knowing.
Absolutely. Once infected, these devices become zombies or bots. They continue to function normally for the owner, but they contain hidden code awaiting instructions. The hacker, acting as a bot herder, can remotely issue a single command to this entire massive botnet, instructing all 1 million devices to simultaneously send continuous connection requests to a single target IP address.
And because the attack is coming from a million different IP addresses all over the world, the firewall can't just block one source. It is completely overwhelmed. To give the listeners a concrete example of the sheer scale of modern DDoS attacks, the Tedmon and Wilhelm text cites a report from Cloudflare, which is a major global cybersecurity company that specializes in internet infrastructure and defending against DDoS.
Yes, the Cloudflare report highlights how DDoS is often used not just for financial extortion, but as a blunt instrument for ideological disruption and silencing voices online. Following the death of George Floyd, Cloudflare monitored internet traffic and reported that social justice and Black Lives Matter advocacy groups faced a staggering 11,120 times increase in cyber attacks aimed at taking their websites offline.
The volume of traffic they documented is almost hard to comprehend. Cloudflare noted that attacks on one single advocacy site peaked at 20,000 requests per second. Let that sink in. 20,000 simultaneous connections hitting a server every single second, driven by a persistent attacker utilizing a massive network of hacked servers.
It demonstrates the terrifying power of a botnet. No standard corporate server architecture can withstand 20,000 requests a second without specialized enterprise-grade DDoS mitigation routing in front of it.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of technology. We understand the malware, the Trojans, the botnets. But let's move to Deep Dive Part 5, which focuses on the most frustrating vulnerability in any system, the human element. Because despite all this incredibly sophisticated code, the weakest link in any corporate security perimeter is almost always us, the humans sitting at the keyboards.
Unfortunately, that is the reality. Cybercriminals know that humans are naturally trusting, easily distracted, eager to please authority figures, and prone to panic. And they weaponize that psychology against us through engineering attacks.
This brings us to phishing and spear phishing. Let's start with a statistic from the text that every business manager needs to memorize. 91% of all cyber attacks launch with a phishing email. 91%. And furthermore, 85% of all daily email attachments are considered harmful for their intended recipients, with 38% of those malicious attachments specifically masked as standard Microsoft Office files like Word or Excel.
Those statistics perfectly highlight why attacking the human is so much more efficient than attacking the firewall. Phishing is defined as the illegitimate use of an email message that is carefully crafted to appear as though it comes from an established, highly trusted organization, a major bank, a popular streaming service, or a national delivery company.
Right.
The email often perfectly mimics the company's official logos, typography, and formatting. The psychological goal is to create a sense of urgency or fear, conning the user into clicking a malicious link that directs them to a fake, spoofed website where they are prompted to type in private information, like a password or social security number, or to manipulate them into downloading an infected Office document.
But standard phishing is essentially a numbers game, a wide net approach. They send out 3 million generic emails pretending to be Netflix, saying your account is suspended due to a billing error. They know 99% of people will ignore it, but they're hoping a few thousand people panic, click the link without checking the URL, and hand over their credit card.
Right. Phishing relies on volume. Spear phishing, on the other hand, is the evolution of this tactic. It is highly targeted, precision-guided psychological manipulation. It is directed at a specific individual, a specific department, or a specific organization. And the attackers do extensive research before they strike.
The text gives a fantastic, concrete example of how this works in practice. Imagine an email arrives in your personal inbox. It doesn't just say, "Dear valued customer," from a random bank you don't use. It uses your first and last name. It looks exactly like it is from the specific regional bank that currently holds your car loan. It might even reference the specific make and model of your car in the subject line, information the attacker easily scraped from your public social media posts. The email states there is an issue with your recent payment and prompts you to visit a site to update your billing info to avoid repossession.
The psychology there is intense. You panic. You click the link, and the site looks identical to your bank's secure portal. You type in your username and password, and instantly, they have your credentials.
Because it was so specifically tailored to you and your actual life circumstances, your normal skepticism was bypassed. You failed to analyze the sender's email address or verify the URL, which leads us to the broader overarching category of social engineering.
Social engineering is a broader concept. It is the use of digital technology, or even just a telephone, to actively manipulate people into divulging confidential information, bypassing security protocols, or granting unauthorized access to systems. It is wildly popular among criminals because, frankly, it is significantly easier and cheaper to exploit an individual's desire to be helpful than it is to spend months trying to write complex code to find a zero-day vulnerability in a firewall.
Let's look at the classic concrete example from the text. The IT imposter scenario.
Imagine you're an entry-level employee at a mid-sized company. It's 4:45 p.m. on a Friday. Your desk phone rings. The caller ID has been spoofed to say it's the internal IT help desk. The person on the line sounds professional, authoritative, but perhaps a bit stressed. They use a lot of technical jargon. They tell you they're dealing with a critical network server crash that is affecting your department, and they need to verify your login credentials immediately to ensure your specific files aren't permanently lost in the reboot process.
The psychology of that is so hard to fight. You want to be a helpful employee. You respect authority. You are terrified of losing your work. And you definitely don't want to be the one difficult employee holding up the critical IT fix on a Friday afternoon.
Exactly. The cybercriminal is exploiting every single one of those cognitive biases. They manufacture a false sense of extreme urgency to prevent you from thinking critically, and they leverage your natural desire to cooperate with authority. That is why cybersecurity cannot just be about software. It is a critical business management need to continuously train employees on how to handle these specific psychological scenarios. Employees must be empowered by management to slow down, push back on urgency, verify the source of the request independently, and internalize the absolute rule that a legitimate IT department will never, ever ask for their password over the phone.
Okay, so we fully grasp the severity of the threats. We understand the malware, the state actors, the natural disasters, and our own human vulnerabilities. How do business leaders actually fight back and manage this? This brings us to risk mitigation and defenses. And it all starts not with buying software, but with a cybersecurity risk assessment.
Correct. You cannot protect what you don't understand. Cybersecurity personnel and business managers have to take a systematic, mathematical approach to defense. They utilize a specific, industry-standard formula to calculate and prioritize their security investments. Risk equals threat times vulnerability times asset.
Risk, threat X, vulnerability X asset. Let's break down each variable in that equation. How does a chief information security officer actually use this in a board meeting?
You have to answer 3 vital questions. First, you define the asset. What are our most valuable IT assets? And the answer changes based on the industry. For hospital network, the most critical asset is patient medical records and life support systems. For a massive e-commerce retailer, it's the customer credit card database and the transaction engine. You assign a value to that asset. Second, you assess the vulnerability. Where are specific weak points regarding that asset? Are we running outdated, unpatched software on the day-to-day servers? Do we have a high turnover rate of untrained employees handling the data? Third, you identify the threat. Who is actively trying to attack us? And what are their capabilities? Are we facing sophisticated ransomware gangs, state-sponsored actors, or just opportunistic script kiddies?
And once you define those 3 variables, you multiply them.
Yes, and that gives you your overall risk calculation. It defines the potential financial and operational impact of a breach weighed against the statistical likelihood of it actually happening.
So the entire purpose of this formula is prioritization and resource allocation. Because a business has a finite budget, you can't protect every single digital asset perfectly. So you use the formula to ask, what is the most cost-effective way to reduce the biggest risk to our most critical asset?
Precisely. To put it bluntly, you do not spend $1 million deploying military-grade encryption to secure a database of employee cafeteria menus. The asset value is low. But you absolutely spend that $1 million securing the central financial transaction database. Once the risk is properly assessed and prioritized, you begin deploying technical defenses. And the primary foundational perimeter defense is the firewall.
A firewall can be implemented as hardware or software, right? Explain the mechanism.
Yes, and a robust corporate security architecture always utilizes both in layered approach. A firewall sits at the boundary between your trusted internal corporate network and the untrusted public internet. It acts as a highly disciplined security guard. It meticulously inspects every single data packet attempting to enter or leave the network, comparing that traffic against a rigid set of pre-established security rules. It allows safe, authorized traffic to pass through and actively drops or blocks unauthorized packets, malware signatures, or suspicious connection attempts.
The text also specifically mentions a technology often integrated with firewalls called NAT Network Access Translation. What is the mechanism of NAT, and how does it protect a network?
Developed initially by Cisco, NAT provides a crucial layer of passive firewall protection by fundamentally altering how IP addresses are broadcast to the internet. Every device on your internal network has a private IP address. NAT sits at the router level and hides all those internal private IP addresses from the outside world.
Let's use an analogy. It's like a massive corporate apartment building. Inside the building, there are hundreds of individual apartments, each with their own specific room number. Those are the private internal IP addresses. But on the outside of the building, facing the street, there is only one single primary street address for the entire complex.
That is exactly how NAT functions. When an employee's computer tries to access a website, the request goes to the NAT router. The router strips away the employee's specific private IP address and replaces it with the company's single shared public IP address before sending it out to the internet. When the website sends the data back, the router remembers who asked for it and forwards it to the correct internal machine.
So if a hacker on the internet tries to scan the company, they don't see 500 individual vulnerable computers. They only see the one public-facing router address.
Exactly. It adds a thick layer of anonymity and structural complexity, making it incredibly difficult for attackers to map the internal network or target specific vulnerable machines within the organization.
But as we discussed earlier when talking about FIN6 and phishing, no firewall, no matter how advanced, is 100% impenetrable. Hackers will find a way in. Which brings us back to the ultimate fail-safe, Backups.
Backups, or what we formally call operational recovery strategies, are the absolute bedrock of survival. This is the disciplined, automated process of generating and storing exact duplicates of your critical datasets and system configurations. If a catastrophic breach occurs, say, a ransomware attack bypasses the firewall and encrypts the primary servers, having a pristine, uncorrupted data backup is the only way you can wipe the infected hardware and restore your systems to a functional pre-attack state without paying the extortion.
But the interval of those backups matters immensely, doesn't it?
Crucially, the interval defines your potential data loss. If a company only backs up their transactional data once a week on Sunday night and a ransomware attack detonates on a Friday afternoon, the company permanently loses an entire business week's worth of corporate data, customer orders, and financial records. For a modern enterprise, that is unacceptable. Backups must happen at regular, highly frequent intervals, sometimes hourly or even continuously for critical databases.
Wow.
And, as we noted during the natural disaster mitigation discussion, those backups must be air-gapped and stored securely offsite or in the cloud to prevent the ransomware from reaching them. Okay, we are entering the final stretch of our deep dive, and this is where the future of cybersecurity is actively being written right now. We have to talk about the AI arms race in cybersecurity. Artificial intelligence is completely shifting the paradigm, acting as a massive force multiplier for both the defenders and the cybercriminals. Let's start with AI on the defense. We are witnessing a massive structural shift away from traditional reactive security tools toward proactive AI-driven models. The best example is the evolution to NGAV, or next-generation antivirus. To understand why it's revolutionary, you have to understand the flaw in traditional antivirus. Traditional software relies heavily on signature detection. It possesses a massive database of known malware code snippets, the signatures. It scans your computer's files, looking for an exact match against that database.
The fundamental flaw there is obvious. If a hacker writes a brand new, unique virus today that has never been seen before, it isn't in the database yet. The traditional antivirus spans it, finds no match, and lets it run.
Exactly. It is entirely reactive. NGAV fundamentally changes the approach by moving beyond static signatures. It utilizes behavior-based detection powered by sophisticated AI and machine learning algorithms. Instead of just looking at the code, the AI continuously monitors how programs actually act and interact with the operating system in real time.
Give me a concrete example of that behavior analysis.
If a completely unknown, previously unseen program suddenly executes and attempts to rapidly encrypt 10,000 files in your Documents folder while simultaneously trying to delete your system's shadow copy backups, the NGAV doesn't care that it lacks a signature for that specific code. The AI immediately recognizes that behavior pattern as highly malicious, analogous to ransomware, and autonomously isolates and kills the process before the encryption finishes. Furthermore, NGAV is inherently cloud-based, allowing for real-time global threat intelligence sharing. If an NGAV system on a laptop in Tokyo detects and analyzes a new malicious behavior pattern, the central AI updates the models, and every single NGAV system in New York, London, and Berlin is instantly immunized against that specific behavior.
That is an incredibly powerful defensive network. The text also details another AI-driven tool, UEBA User and Entity Behavior Analytics. This sounds similar in concept, but instead of monitoring software behavior, it focuses on human behavior, right?
Exactly. UEBA uses machine learning to monitor and analyze how human users, devices, and applications normally behave on a corporate network over time. It ingests massive amounts of log data to establish a highly detailed statistical baseline of what is normal for every single entity.
So let's use a scenario. The UEBA system monitors Bob in the accounting department for 30 days. It learns that Bob's normal baseline is logging in from an IP address in Chicago, usually between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. He routinely accesses specific financial spreadsheet folders on the server, uses a moderate amount of bandwidth, and logs off by 5 p.m.
Right. The AI builds a standard deviation model of Bob's routine. So if 6 months later, Bob's account suddenly logs in at 3:15 a.m. from an unrecognized IP address routing through a server in Eastern Europe, and the account immediately begins attempting to download the entire multi-gigabyte corporate HR database, something Bob has never accessed before, the UEBA AI instantly flags that behavior as a massive statistical anomaly.
Even if the login credentials used were 100% valid and correct.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The system assumes the credentials have been compromised because the behavior violates the baseline. This technology is absolutely essential for catching insider threats.
Let's define insider threats because they are terrifying for an IT director.
Insider threats are authorized network users, employees, contractors, or business partners who misuse their legitimate access. This can be intentional, for malice, espionage, or financial profit, Or it can be unintentional, like an employee falling victim to a phishing scam and unknowingly giving a hacker their login. Traditional perimeter security tools like firewalls completely overlook insider threats because the user already possesses the authorized keys to the castle. They walked right through the front door. UEBA is the internal security camera looking at how they are using those keys. It is also crucial for identifying zero-day attacks, brand new, unpatched vulnerabilities exploited by hackers. UEBA focuses on the anomalous network behavior caused by the zero-day, rather than trying to identify the unknown exploit code itself.
Okay, the AI defenses sound incredibly robust, but this is an arms race. The bad guys have access to the exact same AI technology. How are cybercriminals leveraging AI on the offense?
They are using AI to achieve unprecedented scale, speed, and refinement in their attacks. For example, we discussed spear phishing earlier and how labor-intensive it is for a hacker to research a target. Now, cybercriminals use AI tools to completely automate the reconnaissance process. They deploy AI bots to scrape a target individual's LinkedIn, Twitter, and public company bios in seconds. The AI then uses large language models to rapidly draft hyper-personalized, context-aware phishing emails that mimic the specific writing style and tone of a real colleague or vendor. It makes the emails almost indistinguishable from legitimate communication, and they can generate millions of them a day.
So they use AI to automate the psychological manipulation.
Yes. They also utilize machine learning models to analyze massive data sets of passwords exposed in previous breaches. The AI identifies complex patterns in human password creation, allowing their automated password guessing tools to predict and crack complex passwords with terrifying speed and efficiency. Furthermore, AI is deployed for lightning-fast network scanning, autonomously searching through immense volumes of network data to identify subtle vulnerabilities or misconfigurations in corporate firewalls significantly faster than human security analysts can patch them.
And then there's the concept of polymorphism. This sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. Explain metamorphic malware.
It is the pinnacle of adaptive malware. Cybercriminals are using AI to create malware that constantly and autonomously mutates. Every single time a polymorphic virus spreads to a new system, its internal AI engine rewrites and repackages its own underlying code.
Wait, it changes its own code.
Yes. The malicious function, the payload remains exactly the same, but the code structure, the variable names, and the encryption wrappers are completely altered. It changes its digital signature every single iteration to continually evade traditional signature-based antivirus detection methods. It essentially observes how security software attempts to block it, learns from the interaction, and adapts its structure to bypass the defense on the next attempt.
That is the definition of a true arms race. AI autonomously fighting AI in milliseconds. But the final threat we need to cover today brings the AI threat out of the servers and directly to our ears. It feels incredibly personal. Let's talk about vishing, or voice phishing, and how AI has escalated it.
Phishing attacks are social engineering attempts that happen over the telephone rather than email. But AI has taken phishing to a terrifying, highly effective new level through the use of sophisticated voice cloning technology.
We've all seen the deep fake videos of politicians or celebrities online. But how is this being weaponized specifically for corporate cybercrime?
The barrier to entry for voice cloning has plummeted. Attackers can now pull a very short, maybe 30-second audio clip of a company's CEO speaking perhaps from a public YouTube interview, a quarterly earnings call, or a corporate podcast. They feed that small audio sample into a generative AI tool. The AI analyzes the timbre, pitch, and speech patterns. Within minutes, the attacker can type text into a prompt, and the AI will generate synthetic audio of the CEO saying those exact words, perfectly impersonating their voice, accent, and cadence.
So, walk me through the heist.
The cybercriminal spoofs the caller ID to make it appear as though the call is coming from the executive suite or the CEO's mobile phone. They call a targeted employee in the finance or accounting department. The attacker uses the real-time cloned voice to order an immediate, highly urgent, and highly confidential wire transfer of funds to a fraudulent offshore account, claiming it is for a secret corporate acquisition that must be finalized today.
And because it sounds exactly like the boss, down to the subtle pauses in tone and the caller ID matches, the employee's natural skepticism is completely overridden by the desire to comply with the CEO's urgent demands. The money is gone before they realize it was an AI. How on earth does a business defend against a threat that flawlessly mimics reality?
It requires a fundamental shift in human protocol and corporate culture. Education is the absolute first step. Every employee must be acutely aware that this technology exists and is actively being used. The organizational rule must be rigid and universally enforced. An employee must never divulge sensitive information, alter account details, or authorize the transfer of funds based solely on a spontaneously received phone call, regardless of who the voice sounds like or how urgent the request seems. You must implement a protocol to verify the source.
Meaning you hang up the phone, find the internal trusted directory number for that executive, and call them back directly to confirm the request.
Yes, independent verification is paramount. The text also strongly suggests adopting a posture of not answering calls from unknown or unexpected numbers, forcing them to leave a message that can be verified. Additionally, organizations are increasingly establishing code words.
Like a secret password.
Exactly.
Ah.
It is highly recommended to establish these code words within families for personal safety against extortion scams, but also within corporate departments for sensitive administrative actions. A pre-established, regularly changed code word that only the true authorized participants know can instantly verify if the person on the other end of the line is a real human executive or an AI clone attempting to bypass security.
Right.
If they don't know the word, you disconnect.
Wow. We've covered an immense complex landscape today. We went from the hidden mechanics of Trojans and the devastating physical reality of Stuxnet to calculating the math of risk assessment, surviving natural disasters through geographic redundancy, and finally exploring the absolute bleeding edge of the AI cybersecurity arms race. To everyone listening, thank you so much for taking the time to join this deep dive into the source material. Understanding these specific mechanisms doesn't just make you a better MIS student who can pass an exam. Internalizing this knowledge will make you a vital, irreplaceable asset to the management team of any business you join in the future. Because as we've learned today, protecting the business is the business.
It has been a truly fascinating discussion. The threat landscape is constantly shifting and highly complex, but understanding the fundamental mechanisms and logic behind the attacks is the only way business leaders can build effective, resilient defenses.
Before we sign off, here is a quick reminder. If you found the depth of this analysis valuable, please like, subscribe, follow, and share the deep dive. And we genuinely want to hear from you in the comments. Here is today's engaging discussion question. We want you to apply the theoretical frameworks we just dissected.
Think about a specific business you currently work for, or perhaps a local business you frequently buy from. Using the NIST risk assessment formula we discussed today, where risk equals threat times vulnerability times asset. What do you assess is their single most valuable IT asset? And, based on the specific threats we covered in this discussion, what is the single biggest vulnerability they face in protecting that asset?
Let us know your analysis in the comments. It is an excellent way to put the textbook theory into practical management practice.
We look forward to reading your strategic insights.
And as a quick sneak peek to keep on your radar, in Module 13, we are exploring business computer applications. We'll be looking under the hood at the specific software engines and ERP systems that actually power day-to-day corporate operations and how choosing the right technological tools can completely make or break a company's operational efficiency.
But as you log off and step back into the digital world today, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider. We spent a significant amount of time today analyzing how offensive AI is learning to flawlessly mimic human behavior and voices to bypass security, and conversely, how defensive AI is learning to establish rigid statistical baselines of what is normal to catch the hackers. As artificial intelligence becomes increasingly autonomous on both the offensive and defensive fronts, fighting millions of complex battles in milliseconds, at what point does human management and human decision-making actually become the slowest bottleneck in information systems security?
Something to mull over until next time. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.